Staff Sergeant Maria Santos adjusted her scope for the third time that morning, the mountain air crisp against her weathered hands. The forward operating base Bravo sat perched on a rocky outcropping in Afghanistan's Kunar province, where every sunrise brought new challenges and every sunset counted another day survived. She had been assigned to this remote outpost for 6 months now, building a reputation that preceded her into every briefing room and mess hall conversation. The other soldiers spoke of her in hushed tones. Some called her Ghost Shot, for the way her targets seemed to simply disappear without warning. Others whispered about the impossible shots she had made during the siege at Firebase Charlie, where she had neutralized 3 enemy positions from distances that made seasoned veterans shake their heads in disbelief. But for all the stories that followed her, Maria remained focused on one simple truth. Precision saved lives. Her rifle, a customized Barrett M82A1, had become an extension of herself over the years. Every component had been carefully selected and adjusted to match her breathing patterns, her natural stance, and the subtle way she squeezed the trigger. The weapon weighed nearly 30 pounds fully loaded, but in her hands, it felt as natural as a carpenter's hammer or a surgeon's scalpel. She knew every scratch on its surface, every slight variation in its balance, and exactly how it would behave under any conditions the mountains could throw at them. The morning briefing had been routine until Colonel James Morrison mentioned the new arrival. General Patricia Hayes would be conducting an inspection of forward operating base Bravo, evaluating their defensive capabilities and operational readiness. Morrison had warned them that Hayes was known for her thorough approach and skeptical eye. She had built her career questioning assumptions and demanding proof of every claim made by the soldiers under her command. "She'll want to see demonstrations," Morrison had explained, his weathered face serious. "Hayes doesn't take anyone's word for anything. If you say you can do something, she'll ask you to prove it right then and there." Maria had listened quietly from the back of the briefing room, cleaning her rifle's bolt mechanism with the methodical care of someone who understood that attention to detail meant the difference between success and failure. She had encountered generals before, and they all seemed to follow the same pattern. They would review her service record, nod approvingly at her confirmed kills and commendations, then inevitably ask to see her shoot. It had become almost predictable. What made this different was the terrain surrounding their position. Base Bravo had been chosen specifically for its commanding view of the valley approaches, sitting at an elevation that provided clear sight lines for miles in every direction. The mountains created natural shooting lanes that extended far beyond the normal engagement ranges most snipers ever attempted. Maria had spent countless hours mapping these distances, calculating wind patterns, and understanding how the thin mountain air would affect her shots. The base's defensive perimeter included observation posts at various ranges, the furthest being an abandoned communications bunker at exactly 4,127 meters from her usual shooting position. She had measured it herself using military-grade range-finding equipment, confirmed it with GPS coordinates, and verified it through triangulation with other known positions. The bunker sat on a rocky ledge across the valley, clearly visible through high-powered optics, but appearing as little more than a gray smudge to the naked eye. During quiet periods, when the valley remained peaceful and no immediate threats presented themselves, Maria had studied that distant target extensively. She had observed how the light hit it at different times of day, how heat shimmer affected visibility during the afternoon hours, and how the wind patterns shifted as the sun moved across the sky. She had calculated the bullet drop for that distance, accounting for the thin air at their altitude, the temperature variations, and the complex ballistics involved in such an extreme range shot. The mathematics alone were staggering. At over 4 kilometers, a bullet would take nearly 6 seconds to reach its target, during which time wind, gravity, and atmospheric conditions could deflect it by several feet in any direction. The Coriolis effect, caused by the Earth's rotation, would influence the bullet's path. Even the temperature of the rifle barrel and the specific characteristics of each individual cartridge would play crucial roles in determining where the shot would land. Most military snipers considered shots beyond 1,500 meters to be extremely challenging. Engagements at 2,000 meters were rare and required exceptional skill and ideal conditions. Shots beyond 3,000 meters entered the realm of the theoretical, attempted only by the most elite marksmen with perfect equipment under laboratory-like conditions. But 4,000 meters represented something else entirely. It was a distance that pushed beyond the accepted limits of what was considered possible in practical field conditions. Maria had never attempted the shot, but she had prepared for it with the same methodical approach she brought to every aspect of her craft. She had studied the ballistics tables until she could recite them from memory. She had practiced the breathing techniques and trigger control required for such a precise shot. She had tested her equipment at various ranges, confirming that her rifle and scope combination could deliver the accuracy needed. Most importantly, she had learned to read the environmental conditions that would determine whether such a shot was even possible. The morning General Hayes arrived. The conditions were nearly perfect. The wind was minimal, barely detectable by the sensitive instruments used to measure air movement. The temperature was steady, with no significant thermal variations that might create unpredictable air currents. The humidity was low, reducing atmospheric interference, and the visibility was exceptional, with no haze or distortion affecting the sight picture across the valley. Maria watched from her position as the general's helicopter touched down on the landing pad, rotors kicking up a cloud of dust and small rocks. Hayes stepped out with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to command, her uniform crisp despite the rough flight into the mountains. She was younger than Maria had expected, probably in her early 40s, with sharp eyes that seemed to take in every detail of the base's layout and defensive positions. The inspection began immediately, with Hayes examining everything from ammunition storage procedures to communication equipment maintenance. She questioned every soldier about their specific responsibilities, testing their knowledge and challenging their preparedness. Her reputation for thoroughness proved accurate as she demanded to see documentation, maintenance records, and operational reports that most visiting officers would have accepted without review. When the inspection reached the sniper positions, Colonel Morrison led Hayes to Maria's carefully prepared shooting platform. The position had been reinforced with sandbags and equipped with precision instruments for measuring wind, temperature, and humidity. Her rifle rested on a custom bipod system that allowed for minute adjustments, and her spotting scope was mounted on a separate tripod to provide backup observation capabilities. Hayes examined the setup with obvious expertise, asking detailed questions about the rifle's specifications, the scope's magnification capabilities, and the types of ammunition used for different engagement scenarios. She reviewed Maria's logbook, which contained meticulous records of every shot taken from this position, including range, weather conditions, target description, and results achieved. Impressive documentation. Sergeant Santos, Hayes commented, flipping through pages of carefully recorded data. Your hit percentage at extended ranges is notably high. Maria nodded respectfully. Thank you, General. Consistent documentation helps identify patterns and improve accuracy over time. Hayes continued studying the logbook, pausing at entries that recorded successful engagements at ranges exceeding 2,500 meters. These distances are quite ambitious for field conditions. What's the furthest confirmed kill you've achieved from this position? 2,847 meters, General. Enemy sniper position on the ridge line to the northeast. Single shot confirmed by forward observers. The general lowered the logbook and studied Maria carefully. That's an exceptional distance, Sergeant. What do you consider to be the practical limit for precision shooting under field conditions? Maria glanced across the valley toward the distant communications bunker, then back to the general. That depends on multiple factors, General. Equipment capabilities, atmospheric conditions, target characteristics, and the specific requirements of the mission. Hayes followed her gaze toward the far ridge line. Hypothetically, Sergeant Santos, what would you say about engaging a target at, say, 4,000 meters? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Colonel Morrison shifted uncomfortably, recognizing the tone that suggested Hayes was moving beyond simple inspection into the realm of testing claims and capabilities. The other soldiers who had gathered to watch the demonstration exchanged glances, understanding that something significant was developing. Maria considered her response carefully. She could sense that this was not merely a theoretical discussion, but rather a moment that would define how seriously her abilities would be taken. At 4,000 meters, General, the ballistic challenges become extreme. Bullet drop, wind deflection, and atmospheric effects all combine to make precision extremely difficult. But not impossible? Hayes pressed. Not impossible, General, but highly challenging and dependent on ideal conditions. Hayes smiled, but it was the kind of smile that preceded a challenge rather than an expression of approval. I've reviewed your service record, Sergeant Santos. It's quite impressive. Multiple commendations, numerous confirmed kills at exceptional ranges, and consistent performance under combat conditions. Your reputation suggests you're capable of shots that other snipers would consider impossible. Maria maintained her professional composure, but she could sense where this conversation was leading. I focus on mission requirements, General. Every shot is approached with the same level of preparation and attention to detail. The general walked to the edge of the shooting platform and raised her binoculars, scanning the distant ridge lines and valley approaches. She paused when she reached the old communications bunker, studying it for several long moments. Colonel Morrison, what's the distance to that abandoned structure on the far ridge? Morrison consulted his range card. 4,127 meters, General. It's been surveyed and confirmed multiple times. Hayes lowered her binoculars and turned back to Maria. Sergeant Santos, based on your assessment of current conditions and your equipment's capabilities, would you consider attempting a precision shot at that target? The question was direct and unmistakable in its intent. Maria realized that this had moved beyond a routine inspection into something more significant. She glanced at the wind flags positioned around the shooting platform, noting the minimal air movement. She checked the atmospheric readings on her instruments, confirming the stable conditions she had observed throughout the morning. The target was clearly visible through her spotting scope, and the environmental factors were as favorable as she had ever seen them. General, under current conditions, such an attempt would be technically feasible, though success would not be guaranteed. Hayes nodded slowly. I appreciate your honesty, Sergeant. However, I must tell you that I've seen many exceptional shooters over the years, and I've learned to be skeptical of claims about extreme range capabilities. In my experience, shots at distances approaching 4,000 meters are more about luck than skill. The statement carried the weight of a professional challenge. Maria understood that Hayes was not merely expressing doubt about her abilities, but making a definitive judgment about the practical limits of precision shooting. It was the kind of statement that would define how her skills were perceived and whether her capabilities would be fully utilized in future operations. I understand your perspective, General, Maria replied diplomatically. Long-range shooting does involve factors beyond the shooter's control. Indeed it does, Hayes agreed, which is why I maintain that consistent precision at such ranges is simply not realistic under field conditions. The variables are too numerous and too unpredictable to achieve the kind of accuracy needed for effective military operations. Colonel Morrison sensed the growing tension and attempted to redirect the conversation. General Hayes, perhaps we could demonstrate some of Sergeant Santos's capabilities at more conventional ranges. We have targets established at various distances that would showcase her skills without pushing into the theoretical extremes. But Hayes raised a hand to stop him. Actually, Colonel, I think this presents an interesting opportunity. Sergeant Santos, I'm willing to be proven wrong about the feasibility of extreme-range precision shooting. If you're confident in your abilities and believe current conditions are favorable, I'd be interested to see you attempt the shot." The challenge had been issued clearly and directly. Maria looked across the valley at the distant bunker, calculating the factors that would influence her shot. The wind remained minimal, the visibility was excellent, and her equipment was perfectly zeroed and ready. She had prepared for this shot countless times in her mind, working through the mathematics and the physical requirements. Now she was being asked to prove that her preparations and skills could deliver results when it mattered most. "General, if you're requesting a demonstration, I'm prepared to attempt the engagement." Hayes smiled again, this time with the satisfied expression of someone who believed they were about to prove a point. "Excellent, Sergeant Santos. I look forward to seeing what you can accomplish." The moment stretched between challenge and action as Maria began her methodical preparation. She had learned long ago that exceptional shooting required more than natural talent or expensive equipment. It demanded a systematic approach that eliminated as many variables as possible while accounting for those that remained beyond human control. The mathematics alone would have intimidated most shooters, but for Maria, they represented the foundation upon which impossible shots became achievable reality. She began by checking her rifle's condition with the thoroughness of a surgeon preparing for a critical operation. Every component received careful attention, from the bolt's smooth operation to the scope's mounting system. The barrel had been cleaned and inspected that morning, but she verified its condition again, looking for any signs of fouling or obstruction that might affect the bullet's path. Her custom hand-loaded ammunition had been prepared specifically for these extreme-range conditions, each cartridge weighed and measured to ensure consistency. The ballistic computer mounted on her rifle's rail system came alive as she input the current environmental data. Atmospheric pressure, temperature, humidity, and wind speed all fed into calculations that would determine how her bullet would behave during its 6-second journey across the valley. The device processed hundreds of variables simultaneously, providing firing solutions that accounted for everything from the Earth's rotation to the specific characteristics of her ammunition. "Distance to target, 4,127 meters, she announced, confirming the range that had been measured and verified multiple times. "Current temperature, 68 degrees Fahrenheit. Barometric pressure, 24.3 inches of mercury. Humidity at 31%. General Hayes watched with growing interest as Maria continued her calculations. The level of detail and scientific precision involved began to suggest that this might be more than simply pointing a rifle in the right direction and hoping for the best. The equipment alone represented thousands of hours of testing and refinement, designed specifically for the kind of extreme-range shooting that most military units would never attempt. Maria adjusted her scope's elevation turret, making precise clicks that would account for the massive bullet drop over such a distance. At 4,127 meters, her bullet would fall nearly 800 feet from its initial trajectory, requiring compensation that pushed her scope's adjustment range to its limits. The windage adjustments were more complex, accounting not only for the current wind conditions at her position, but for the estimated wind patterns across the entire valley. "The bullet will take 5.8 seconds to reach the target," Maria explained to the assembled group. "During that time, it will be affected by wind conditions that may vary significantly across the distance. I've identified 3 distinct wind zones based on topographical features and thermal patterns." She pointed to different sections of the valley, explaining how the mountain ridges and the temperature differential between sunny and shaded areas would create air currents that could push her bullet off course. Her spotting scope revealed subtle visual cues that indicated wind direction and strength at various distances, signs that most observers would miss, but that an experienced shooter could read like a weather map. Colonel Morrison found himself genuinely impressed by the scientific approach Maria was taking. He had seen skilled snipers before, but the level of preparation and analysis she was demonstrating went far beyond anything he had witnessed. This was less like traditional marksmanship and more like artillery fire control, requiring the kind of precision calculations typically associated with long-range bombardment rather than individual rifle shots. The target itself presented additional challenges beyond simple distance. The abandoned communications bunker was constructed of concrete and metal, creating a hard target that would provide clear evidence of a hit, but would also be unforgiving of any shot placement that wasn't precise. Maria had identified a specific aiming point on the structure's wall, a rectangular panel that would provide visual confirmation while being large enough to allow for the minor variations that even perfect shooting might produce at such range. "I'll be aiming for the communication panel on the bunker's east-facing wall," Maria announced. "It's approximately 2 meters wide and 1.5 meters tall, painted white for visibility during the bunker's operational period." General Hayes raised her binoculars again, studying the distant target. Even with magnification, the panel appeared as a small rectangular shape that seemed impossibly tiny given the distance involved. She began to appreciate the magnitude of what Maria was proposing to attempt. The target area, while large enough to provide reasonable aim point, would subtend less than half a minute of angle at the extreme range. It was the equivalent of trying to hit a playing card at 100 meters, a comparison that made the challenge seem even more daunting. "Sergeant Santos," Hayes said, lowering her binoculars, "I want to be completely clear about what we're attempting here. You're proposing to place a single shot onto a target at a distance of over 2.5 miles under field conditions with witnesses present to verify the results." "Yes, General, that's correct," Hayes nodded slowly. "And you believe your calculations and preparations will enable you to achieve success?" Maria considered her response carefully. False confidence would serve no purpose, but she also needed to convey her genuine assessment of the shot's feasibility. "General, I believe the current conditions and my equipment's capabilities make success possible. However, at this range, even perfect execution cannot guarantee results due to variables beyond human control. Such as micro-variations in wind conditions that cannot be precisely measured across the entire flight path, slight inconsistencies in ammunition performance despite quality control measures, atmospheric turbulence caused by thermal effects that may not be visible or predictable, equipment limitations that become magnified at extreme ranges." Hayes appreciated the honest assessment. Too many soldiers would have claimed certainty where none existed, or would have downplayed the difficulties involved to appear more confident. Maria's acknowledgement of the challenges actually increased her credibility rather than diminishing it. This was clearly someone who understood exactly what she was attempting and had realistic expectations about the factors involved. The wind remained favorable as Maria settled into her shooting position, adjusting her body alignment to ensure maximum stability and consistency. Her shooting platform had been carefully constructed to eliminate any movement or vibration that might affect accuracy. The sandbags supporting her rifle were positioned to provide solid support while allowing for minute adjustments. Her bipod system was designed specifically for extreme range shooting, incorporating features that minimized harmonic vibrations and maintained precise aim point control. Maria's breathing routine began the process of settling into the focused state required for precision shooting. She had developed techniques over years of practice that allowed her to control her heart rate and eliminate the subtle body movements that could throw off a shot at extreme range. Each breath was controlled and measured, timed to create the natural respiratory pause where her body would be most stable. The rifle's trigger had been adjusted to break at exactly 2 pounds of pressure, allowing for the kind of precise control necessary when any unexpected movement could send a shot wide of the target. Maria's finger placement on the trigger face was consistent with thousands of hours of practice, positioned to provide straight-back pressure without any sideways deflection that might disturb the rifle's aim. Through her scope, the distant target appeared closer, but still presented a challenging sight picture. The magnification brought the bunker into clear view while also magnifying any movement in her crosshairs. She could see heat shimmer rising from some parts of the valley floor, creating distortions that would affect bullet flight. Her experience allowed her to read these conditions and factor them into her final aiming adjustments. "I'm ready to engage the target," Maria announced. General Hayes positioned herself with a spotting scope that would allow her to observe the shot's impact. Colonel Morrison and the other soldiers found vantage points where they could watch both the shooter and the target area. The atmosphere around the shooting platform became focused and quiet, with everyone understanding that they were about to witness something extraordinary, regardless of the outcome. Maria made her final scope adjustments, tweaking the windage and elevation based on last-minute observations of the atmospheric conditions. The crosshairs settled onto her chosen aiming point, and she began the breathing sequence that would culminate in the shot. Her heart rate slowed, her vision seemed to sharpen, and her entire world narrowed to the relationship between her rifle and the distant target. The first pressure was applied to the trigger, taking up the slight slack in the mechanism without disturbing the rifle's position. Maria's breathing reached the natural pause between exhale and inhale, the moment when her body would be most stable. The crosshairs held steady on the target, compensating for the calculated bullet drop and wind deflection that would affect her shot during its long flight across the valley. The trigger broke cleanly, and the rifle recoiled against her shoulder with the familiar push of the large-caliber cartridge. The muzzle brake redirected the blast and reduced felt recoil, but the sound echoed across the valley like thunder, announcing to everyone within miles that something significant had just occurred. Maria maintained her position behind the scope, watching through the sight picture as her bullet began its journey toward the distant target. In the seconds that followed, time seemed suspended as the bullet crossed the valley at nearly 3 times the speed of sound. Maria tracked its theoretical path through her scope, while General Hayes and the other observers watched the target area through their binoculars and spotting scopes. The bullet's flight time of nearly 6 seconds felt like an eternity, as everyone waited to see if the mathematical calculations and technical preparations would translate into actual results. The sound of the rifle's report continued echoing off the mountain walls, creating a rolling thunder that would take several seconds to fully dissipate. But those echoes were still reverberating when a different sound reached them from across the valley. A sharp crack, distinct and unmistakable, announced that something had struck the distant bunker with considerable force. General Hayes kept her binoculars focused on the target area, scanning for visual evidence of the bullet's impact. The distance made immediate assessment difficult, but she could see what appeared to be fresh damage on the bunker's east-facing wall, exactly where Maria had aimed. A white mark on the concrete surface suggested that the bullet had found its intended target. "I observe what appears to be a hit on the target," Hayes announced, though her voice carried a note of disbelief. "I can see fresh impact damage on the communication panel." Colonel Morrison confirmed the observation through his own optics. "I concur, General. There's clear evidence of bullet impact on the designated target area." The implications of what had just occurred began to settle over the group. Maria had not only attempted the seemingly impossible shot, but appeared to have succeeded with a precision that defied conventional understanding of marksmanship capabilities. The bullet had traveled over 2.5 miles through varying atmospheric conditions and had struck within the intended target area, all while being observed by multiple witnesses who could verify the results. But General Hayes was not quite ready to concede that her skepticism had been proven wrong. The distance involved made precise assessment of the shot's accuracy difficult, and she wanted confirmation that went beyond visual observation from their current position. The professional stakes involved required verification that would eliminate any possibility of doubt or misinterpretation. "Sergeant Santos," Hayes said, maintaining her focus on the distant target, "while I can observe what appears to be an impact in the target area, I believe we need closer examination to confirm the precise accuracy of your shot. The distance makes definitive assessment challenging from this position." Maria nodded, understanding the general's position. Extraordinary claims required extraordinary evidence, and the shot she had just taken certainly qualified as extraordinary by any reasonable standard. "General, I recommend we send a team to examine the target directly. Physical evidence will provide the confirmation needed to document the results." Hayes agreed, and within minutes, a helicopter was being prepared for the flight across the valley to examine the target. The aircraft would carry Colonel Morrison and a small team equipped with measuring devices and cameras that would provide detailed documentation of the bullet's impact. The flight would take only a few minutes, but would provide definitive evidence of what had been accomplished from the shooting position over 4 kilometers away. As they waited for the confirmation team's report, General Hayes found herself re-evaluating her assumptions about the limits of precision shooting. The technical competence Maria had demonstrated went far beyond anything she had previously witnessed, suggesting levels of skill and preparation that challenged conventional understanding of what was possible in practical field conditions. The helicopter's rotors spun up to speed, and the aircraft lifted off from the landing pad, carrying the confirmation team toward the distant target. In a few minutes, they would have the evidence needed to determine whether Maria Santos had indeed achieved something that military doctrine considered beyond the realm of practical possibility. The sound of her shot was still echoing off the mountain walls, but soon they would know if her bullet had arrived before that echo faded into silence. The helicopter's flight across the valley provided Colonel Morrison with a unique perspective on the shot Maria had just attempted. From the air, the true scale of the distance became apparent in a way that ground-based observation could not convey. The shooting position at Forward Operating Base Bravo appeared as a small cluster of structures perched on the mountainside, while the target bunker emerged as an isolated concrete structure on the far ridgeline. The expanse of terrain between them stretched for miles, crossed by wind currents, thermal columns, and atmospheric conditions that would have challenged the most sophisticated weapons systems. As the helicopter approached the bunker, Morrison could see evidence of the bullet's impact even from several hundred meters away. A distinct mark on the concrete wall was visible, creating a white scar against the weathered gray surface where the high-velocity projectile had struck. The damage appeared to be concentrated in exactly the area where Maria had intended to place her shot, suggesting a level of precision that seemed almost impossible given the extreme range involved. The helicopter settled onto a rocky area near the bunker, rotors kicking up dust and debris as the aircraft touched down. Morrison and his team quickly disembarked, carrying measuring equipment, cameras, and documentation materials that would provide irrefutable evidence of the shot's accuracy. The abandoned communications facility had been built during an earlier phase of military operations in the region, constructed of reinforced concrete designed to withstand both enemy fire and harsh mountain weather. Morrison approached the east-facing wall where the impact had occurred, immediately recognizing the distinctive signature of a high-velocity rifle round. The bullet had struck the white-painted communication panel with tremendous force, creating a crater in the concrete surface and leaving no doubt about the nature of the damage. Fragments of the projectile were embedded in the concrete, while the surrounding area showed the characteristic spalling pattern created by the bullet's extreme velocity. Using precision measuring equipment, Morrison's team documented the exact location of the impact relative to the target area Maria had designated. The bullet had struck within 18 inches of the intended aiming point, an achievement that represented extraordinary accuracy considering the 4,127-meter distance and the numerous variables that could have affected the shot. The measurement confirmed what visual observation had suggested. This was not a lucky accident, but rather the result of exceptional skill and meticulous preparation. The team photographed the impact from multiple angles, capturing both close-up details of the bullet damage and wider shots that showed the impact's location within the context of the entire target area. They collected fragments of the projectile for analysis and documented the precise GPS coordinates of the impact point. Every aspect of the evidence was recorded with the kind of thoroughness that would satisfy the most demanding scrutiny. Meanwhile, back at the shooting position, General Hayes waited with a mixture of anticipation and professional curiosity. The implications of what she might have just witnessed challenged fundamental assumptions about the practical limits of individual marksmanship. If Maria had indeed achieved the accuracy that initial observation suggested, it would represent a capability that exceeded anything Hayes had previously encountered in her military career. Maria remained at her rifle position, conducting the kind of post-shot analysis that exemplified her methodical approach to precision shooting. She recorded the exact conditions under which the shot had been taken, noting wind speed, temperature, humidity, and atmospheric pressure for future reference. Her shooting log would document every detail of the engagement, creating a permanent record that could be analyzed and learned from regardless of the final outcome. The radio crackled to life as Colonel Morrison's voice came through from the target site. "Base Bravo, this is confirmation team. We have completed initial assessment of the target." General Hayes picked up the radio handset, her expression revealing nothing of her thoughts. "Go ahead, confirmation team." "General, we have confirmed direct hit on the designated target area. Bullet impact is located 17 inches below and 8 inches right of the intended aiming point. The projectile struck with sufficient force to create significant damage to the concrete surface. Impact location and trajectory are consistent with fire from our shooting position." The words hung in the air as their full implications became clear. Maria Santos had not only achieved a hit at an extraordinary range, but had done so with accuracy that fell well within acceptable parameters for precision shooting at any distance. The slight variation from her intended point of aim was negligible considering the extreme range and the numerous factors that could have influenced the bullet's flight path. Hayes keyed the radio again. "Confirmation team, are you certain of your measurements and assessment?" "Affirmative, General. We have photographic documentation, precise measurements, and physical evidence that confirms the accuracy of the engagement. The shot placement would be considered excellent even at conventional sniper ranges." General Hayes set down the radio and turned to face Maria, who had risen from her shooting position and was securing her rifle. The expression on Hayes's face had changed from skepticism to something approaching amazement, though her professional composure remained intact. She had challenged Maria to prove her capabilities, expecting to demonstrate the limitations of extreme-range shooting. Instead, she had witnessed a demonstration of skill that exceeded her understanding of what was possible. "Sergeant Santos," Hayes said, her voice carrying a new tone of respect, "I believe I owe you an apology." Maria maintained her professional demeanor despite the significance of the moment. "No apology necessary, General. Skepticism about extreme-range capabilities is understandable and appropriate." Hayes shook her head. "Sergeant, what you just accomplished challenges everything I thought I knew about practical marksmanship limits. I've spent 20 years in the military, and I've never seen anything that approaches the precision you just demonstrated." The helicopter carrying the confirmation team could be heard returning across the valley, bringing with it the physical evidence that would document Maria's achievement for the permanent record. But the radio report had already provided confirmation of what many would have considered impossible just minutes earlier. A single shot, fired under field conditions by an individual soldier, had found its target across a distance of over 2.5 miles. Colonel Morrison's voice came over the radio again as the helicopter approached the landing pad. General Hayes, we're returning with complete documentation of the target assessment. The evidence clearly confirms exceptional accuracy at extreme range. As the helicopter touched down, Hayes found herself reconsidering not just her assessment of Maria's capabilities, but her understanding of what properly trained and equipped snipers might be able to accomplish under ideal conditions. The technical preparation she had witnessed suggested that extreme-range shooting was not simply a matter of pointing a rifle in the right direction, but rather a complex discipline that combined advanced ballistics, environmental science, and exceptional individual skill. Colonel Morrison emerged from the helicopter carrying folders of documentation and a laptop computer containing digital photographs of the target assessment. His expression conveyed both professional satisfaction and genuine amazement at what his team had discovered. The physical evidence would provide permanent documentation of an achievement that challenged conventional understanding of marksmanship capabilities. "General," Morrison reported, "the accuracy achieved at that range is simply extraordinary. The bullet placement would be considered excellent shooting at any distance, but at 4,127 meters, it represents something I've never seen before." Hayes reviewed the photographs on Morrison's laptop, studying close-up images of the bullet impact and measurements that confirmed the shot's precision. The evidence was clear and unambiguous, documented with the kind of thoroughness that would satisfy any level of scrutiny. Maria Santos had achieved something that would be remembered and discussed long after the participants in today's demonstration had moved on to other assignments. "Sergeant Santos," Hayes said, closing the laptop and facing Maria directly, "I stated earlier that I believed consistent precision at ranges approaching 4,000 meters was not realistic under field conditions. I was wrong." Maria accepted the acknowledgement with the same professionalism she had displayed throughout the demonstration. "General, extreme-range shooting does involve significant challenges and limitations. Today's conditions were exceptionally favorable." "Perhaps," Hayes agreed, "but the level of preparation and technical competence you demonstrated suggests that you could achieve similar results whenever conditions permit. That represents a capability that has obvious tactical implications." The conversation was interrupted by a sound that had been building in the background, but was just now becoming clearly audible. The echo of Maria's rifle shot, which had been bouncing off mountain peaks and valley walls across the rugged terrain, was finally returning to their position as a faint but unmistakable rolling thunder. The sound had traveled for miles through the mountain landscape, reflected and re-reflected by the rocky surfaces until it seemed to come from all directions at once. Hayes paused to listen as the echo continued to reverberate through the mountains, a ghostly reminder of the shot that had been fired minutes earlier. The timing was remarkable. Maria's bullet had reached its target and been confirmed by ground inspection before the sound of her shot had finished traveling through the complex terrain surrounding their position. "Sergeant Santos," Hayes said, once the echo had finally faded to silence, "that may be the most impressive demonstration of individual marksmanship I've ever witnessed. You fired a shot that reached its target before the echo of that shot returned to us. I'm not sure I fully understood the implications of that timing until this moment." The symbolism was powerful and unmistakable. Maria's bullet had traveled at nearly 3 times the speed of sound, covering the distance to its target in less than 6 seconds, while the acoustic signature of her shot took much longer to complete its journey through the mountain terrain. It was a perfect metaphor for the way exceptional capability could exceed conventional expectations and limitations. General Hayes spent the remainder of her inspection tour asking detailed questions about Maria's training, equipment, and techniques. She reviewed the technical specifications of the rifle and ammunition, studied the ballistic calculations involved in extreme-range shooting, and discussed the environmental factors that made such precision possible. Her skepticism had been replaced by professional curiosity and genuine respect for the level of expertise Maria had demonstrated. Before departing Forward Operating Base Bravo, Hayes made arrangements for Maria's capabilities to be formally documented and incorporated into operational planning for the region. The tactical implications of having a sniper who could engage targets at ranges exceeding 4 kilometers were significant, potentially changing how the unit approached reconnaissance, overwatch, and defensive operations. "Sergeant Santos," Hayes said as her helicopter prepared for departure, "I came here expecting to demonstrate the practical limitations of extreme-range marksmanship. Instead, I've learned that those limitations may be more flexible than I understood. Your capabilities represent a significant tactical asset." Maria saluted as the general prepared to board her aircraft. "Thank you, General. I'm honored to serve where my skills can be most effective." Hayes returned the salute, then paused before boarding the helicopter. "Sergeant, I suspect that what happened here today will be discussed and analyzed for years to come. You've set a new standard for what's possible when exceptional skill meets ideal conditions." As the helicopter lifted off and disappeared over the mountain ridges, Maria returned to her rifle position to complete her documentation of the day's events. Her shooting log now contained an entry that recorded conditions, calculations, and results for a shot that had achieved something many would have considered beyond the realm of possibility. The mathematical precision of her preparations had been validated by results that spoke louder than any theoretical discussion. Colonel Morrison found her there an hour later, still working through the technical analysis of her extraordinary shot. "Maria," he said, using her first name for the first time, "I think you've changed how a lot of people are going to think about what's possible with precision shooting." She looked up from her calculations, a slight smile crossing her weathered face. "Sir, I've always believed that proper preparation and attention to detail can overcome most limitations. Today's conditions just happen to be perfect for proving that point." Morrison nodded, understanding that he had witnessed something that transcended normal military procedure and entered the realm of individual excellence that defined the very best soldiers. Maria Santos had not only met an impossible challenge, but had done so with the kind of precision that would be remembered long after the participants had moved on to other assignments and other challenges. The echo of her shot had finally faded completely, but the impact of what she had accomplished would continue to reverberate through military circles for years to come. General Hayes had arrived expecting to demonstrate the limitations of human capability. Instead, she had witnessed a demonstration of what became possible when exceptional skill, meticulous preparation, and ideal conditions combined to achieve something that challenged the very boundaries of what military doctrine considered feasible. In the end, Maria's bullet had indeed arrived before the echo of her shot returned to silence, proving that sometimes the impossible was simply a challenge that hadn't yet met the right combination of skill, preparation, and determination to overcome it. The general had claimed she'd never reach 4,000 meters, but the fresh crater in a concrete wall more than 2 miles away told a different story entirely.